Have you ever wondered what it's like to be the hunted, lost in a place where every shadow could conceal your worst nightmare? Imagine being trapped in a jungle so dense, so wild, that every step you take could be your last. A jungle full of monstrous creatures, where survival isn't guaranteed, and the unknown lurks behind every tree. This is the world Heidi finds herself in, a world where every whisper of the wind could be the predator drawing closer, and every sound in the distance could mean something far worse than she ever imagined. Welcome to the Forest of Monsters, the latest chapter in the Oblivion cycle. Heidi, a brave and skilled explorer, had always loved the thrill of discovering new worlds, new places, but nothing could have prepared her for what she found on this uncharted planet. It was supposed to be just another routine mission, an exploration, some sample gathering, a quick check of the terrain before the main team arrived. What started as a simple survey quickly turned into a nightmare. Heidi and her best friend had landed on this lush, green planet, marveling at its beauty. The jungles stretched out in all directions, teeming with life, rivers cutting through, the landscape like veins of water on a living organism. But beauty, as Heidi was about to learn, can be deceiving. The jungle, with all its vibrant colors and rich biodiversity, hid something far darker beneath the surface, something that wanted them, something that was now hunting them. It started with the scream, a bone-chilling, blood-curdling cry that echoed through the trees. A scream that wasn't from a frightened animal or a strange creature. No, it was the scream of something that hunted for food, driven by an insatiable hunger. The same hunger that now chased Heidi through the jungle, every step a race against time. She had never felt fear like this. With every crashing step, the jungle seemed to close in on her. The weight of the trees, the thick undergrowth, and the constant sound of something following just behind her, making her heart pound louder than the sound of her footsteps. Heidi's breath came in ragged gasps, her body pushed to its limits. But it wasn't just the physical exhaustion that weighed her down. No, it was the feeling of being watched, of knowing that something was just a heartbeat away, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But the jungle wasn't just a backdrop to this terrifying pursuit. It was a character in its own right, a maze of twisted trees, sharp thorns, and a canopy so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. The jungle was a deadly labyrinth, hiding secrets in its depths, and Heidi had no choice but to navigate it or be swallowed by it. Each new path she took seemed to lead her deeper into danger. The predator, whatever it was relentless, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was learning her every move. As she stumbled through the thick underbrush, her mind raced, trying to piece together how this had gone so wrong. One minute, she was walking the perimeter of their ship, marveling at the beauty of the untouched world, and the next, she found herself falling into a ravine, alone, separated from her friend, her communicator damaged, and no way to call for help. That was the moment it all changed. That was when the thing, whatever it was, began to follow her. Now, with every breath, Heidi feared she was getting closer to the thing that had started this nightmare. The terror wasn't just in the chase. It was in the uncertainty. The unknown predator never revealed itself fully, only its presence, its hungry, terrifying sounds. Was it a creature from the depths of the jungle, or something far worse, something ancient perhaps, that had been lying in wait for an intruder to stumble upon its domain? Heidi had no answers. She could only keep running, hoping that the next turn would lead her to safety. Though deep down, she knew that she was running out of time. The weight of fear hung heavy on Heidi's shoulders, and every noise, every rustle of leaves, made her muscles tighten in dread. She was no longer just running from a creature. She was running from the very real possibility that she might never make it out of this jungle alive. But even as exhaustion began to take its toll, Heidi refused to stop. She knew that if she slowed down, if she hesitated for even a moment, she'd never get the chance to run again. The jungle had claimed its share of lives before, and if she wasn't careful, it would claim hers too. In her desperate flight, Heidi found herself climbing trees, crossing fallen logs, and scrambling through dense patches of foliage. Her mind spinning, her body aching. Each action, each decision was a matter of survival. She fought to stay calm, but the fear kept creeping in, threatening to overwhelm her. What if she was just a step away from safety? Or what if the predator was closer than she dared to imagine, waiting for her to make the fatal mistake of thinking she was safe? As Heidi paused for just a moment to catch her breath, her eyes scanned the jungle around her. Was it possible that she had lost the predator? Could she be free? A chilling scream answered her question, a scream closer than before, sending a jolt of terror through her chest. It was still following her, still hunting her. She was running out of time, and with no idea where she was, where her friend might be, and no working communication device, she realized that her fight for survival was far from over. She had no choice but to keep moving forward, into the unknown, deeper into the forest where monsters roamed. But would she make it out alive? The story isn't over yet. In the next chapter of the Oblivion cycle, Heidi's journey continues, and the mystery behind the creatures stalking the jungle begins to unfold. But will she survive long enough to uncover the truth? Stay tuned for the next part of this terrifying tale. And remember, in a place like this, there's no such thing as safety. There's only survival. Heidi pushed forward, her legs trembling. With exhaustion, her breath ragged and shallow, every step was a struggle as she forced her way through the thick underbrush. The jungle had swallowed her whole, and every direction she turned seemed to lead to more of the same: dense trees, tangled vines, and the ever-present sense that she was being watched. The predator's screech echoed once more through the trees, sending a sharp jolt of panic through her chest. It was getting closer, but Heidi couldn't afford to stop. Her heart pounded in her ears, drowning out everything except the sound of her own desperation. She had no idea where her friend was, or if they were even still alive. The ravine, where everything had gone wrong, felt like a lifetime ago. She'd stumbled down it, tried to climb back up, only to find the soil too soft to grip, the walls too steep. In that moment, her mind had raced, wondering if she'd ever see the ship again. The crew, home. That's when she'd called out for help. But that was when the screams had started, the blood-curdling, animalistic howls that hadn't sounded like any creature she knew. They sounded almost human. That was the moment she realized they weren't alone on this planet. There was something far more dangerous than simple wildlife here, something that made the jungle feel alive in ways that she couldn't understand. And it was hunting them. The sounds of the jungle were deafening, a constant symphony of rustling leaves and distant cries. But it was the silence that Heidi feared most. Whenever the jungle fell quiet, she could almost feel the predator's eyes on her. She remembered the stories she had read before the mission, tales of uncharted planets, of dangers beyond imagination, creatures that had never been seen before, living in places untouched by human feet. But those stories had been distant fantasies, not reality. And now reality was coming for her. She heard the brush crack behind her, the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the undergrowth. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it the predator? Or was it her friend? Could they have found her? But no. The sounds were too deliberate, too heavy to be anything human. It was the predator, closing in with an eerie patience. Heidi stumbled, her foot catching on a root as she tried to regain her footing. Panic gripped her chest as she scrambled to her feet. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't even see it, but she knew it was there, just out of sight, waiting for the moment when she would collapse. Her thoughts raced, each one a desperate plea for survival. She needed to think, to find a way to stop this, to fight back. She couldn't. Her mind couldn't focus long enough to make a plan. Her body was betraying her. Her legs felt like lead, her vision blurry as sweat stung her eyes. The air was thick and suffocating, the humidity making her skin crawl. Every breath felt like it would be her last. She had to keep moving, but where? She had no idea which way was the right direction anymore. The ship, her friend, they could be miles away by now, or worse, already gone. Heidi's thoughts were interrupted by another scream, this one closer, louder. It wasn't a distant sound anymore. It was right there. And then, through the dense foliage, she saw it, a flash of movement, quick and savage. Her blood ran cold. The creature was massive, its eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. It was no animal she had ever seen. Its body was long and sleek, covered in rough, dark scales, and it moved with terrifying speed, its limbs rippling with muscle as it closed in on her. She turned, instinct kicking in, and bolted once more, pushing herself faster than she thought possible. The jungle blurred around her, but the thing was getting closer. She could hear its labored breathing, feel the ground shake beneath her as it chased her through the trees. Her lungs burned, her body screamed for rest, but she couldn't stop. Not now. She had to stay ahead. The dense undergrowth parted ahead of her, and for a brief moment, Heidi thought she might have found a path. She took it, leaping over fallen logs and ducking under vines. Her mind focused solely on survival. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the leaves, and she went down hard, her palms slamming against the ground. She barely had time to react before a sound, louder, closer, came from behind. She twisted around, heart hammering, and saw the thing again. It was only feet away now. She scrambled to her feet, panic flooding her veins, and before she could even make a move, something slammed into her from the side, knocking her to the ground. Pain exploded across her body as she collided with the jungle floor. She gasped, her vision swimming, and tried to push herself up, but her arms felt like jelly. She could hear the creature's growl, deep and guttural, as it loomed over her. Its hot breath burned her skin as it leaned in, its mouth opening to reveal rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. And then, just as she thought the end was inevitable, there was a flash of movement. Another form, human, appeared beside her, lunging at the creature, tackling it with surprising strength. Heidi's mind was too foggy to understand what was happening. The two forms crashed to the ground in a frenzy, the creature snarling and snapping, but the figure, her friend, was holding its own. "Get up, run!" the voice shouted, strained with effort. It was her friend. They were alive. Without thinking, Heidi pushed herself to her feet, stumbling toward her friend, her heart still racing. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Every instinct told her to run, to escape while she still could, but the jungle was a maze, and the deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. The predator wasn't the only threat. There were others, creatures lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. The jungle was alive, and it had its own rules that Heidi didn't understand, and the longer they stayed in it, the harder it would be to escape. They ran together now, faster than ever, but the jungle seemed to close in around them, and the creature, its eyes glowing, its presence relentless, was never far behind. Time was running out. They had to find a way to fight back, to survive, before the jungle consumed them both. The jungle seemed to stretch on forever, its endless trees and thick underbrush, offering no reprieve from the hunt. Heidi and her friend, breathless and frantic, had no choice but to keep running, their boots slamming against the damp earth as they pushed through the thick vines and tangled branches. The predator was still behind them, closer now, its presence felt in every rustle, every snap of a twig. The darkness of the jungle pressed in from all sides, but there was no time to think about anything except survival. Heidi's legs burned, her chest ached, as each labored breath felt more desperate than the last. Her friend, equally exhausted, was just a few paces ahead, their face set in determination. "Keep moving!" they shouted, voice strained but full of urgency. But Heidi wasn't sure how much longer they could keep this up. The predator's growls had grown louder, more frantic, as if it could sense victory within its reach. But then, in the distance, something caught her eye. A faint light, almost invisible through the trees. A glow that seemed out of place in the otherwise dark jungle. She slowed for a split second, eyes narrowing, and then she saw it. A faint outline of something not entirely natural, like the shape of a structure hidden amongst the trees. It was their only chance. "This way!" she shouted, her voice breaking through the pounding sound of their footsteps. Her friend hesitated for a moment, but only a moment. Together, they veered off the path, heading toward the distant light. Every instinct told them to run, to flee. But now they had a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the ship. Maybe someone had found their way to safety. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something left behind long ago by another explorer. Whatever it was their best shot. As they pushed through the last stretch of jungle, Heidi's heart sank. The predator was nearly upon them. She could hear its feet pounding the earth, the sounds of its growls growing louder, closer. But there was no turning back now. The light was brighter, clearer, and they were almost there. They just had to hold on for a little longer. They reached the structure, and Heidi's breath hitched as she took in what was before them. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't anything man-made at all. It was a massive stone monument, half covered in vines, ancient and weathered by time. There were strange symbols carved into its surface, one she didn't recognize. This wasn't a place they'd stumbled upon by accident. This was something old, something forgotten. Her friend looked just as stunned, but there was no time for questions. The growls of the predator were almost deafening now, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The jungle had been quiet for a moment, as if holding its breath, but now the predator was close enough to make its final move. Then, with a sudden force, Heidi's friend grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the monument. "Now!" they shouted, pulling her behind a massive stone pillar. The predator burst from the underbrush just a moment later, its glowing eyes scanning the area. It was so close that Heidi could feel the heat of its breath. But the jungle, strange as it was, seemed to react to the creature's presence. The ground beneath their feet rumbled again, and suddenly, the trees began to shake. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. And then, with terrifying speed, the stone structure seemed to come alive. A deep rumbling sound echoed through the air, and vines shot up from the ground, wrapping themselves around the predator. It struggled, screeching, but the vines tightened, pulling it into the earth with an unnatural force. Heidi and her friend stumbled back in shock, watching as the creature was consumed by the very jungle it had once dominated. Heidi's breath caught in her throat. What had just happened? What was this place? And why had it reacted like that? Before she could ask, the ground shifted again, and the monument began to hum, a low vibrating sound that seemed to resonate through her entire body. She felt a strange pull, almost as if the monument was calling to her. Her friend stood next to her, equally stunned, but then their eyes met, and a shared realization passed between them. This was no accident. This wasn't just a structure. It was a safeguard, a hidden defense left behind by an ancient civilization to protect something or someone, and it had just saved their lives. They stood there for a moment, catching their breath, before slowly backing away from the monument. The jungle, for now, seemed to settle. The vines that had ensnared the predator were no longer moving, and the unnatural hum of the monument faded into a soft whisper. The danger had passed, for now, we need to get out of here, Heidi said, her voice steadying as the adrenaline started to wear off. Her friend nodded, still in shock, but both of them knew the truth. This planet was full of mysteries, dangerous ones. The predator was only the beginning. There was far more to this jungle than they had ever imagined. They started to walk, their steps slower now, each of them lost in thought. They'd survived the first wave, but they weren't safe yet. There were still questions to be answered, secrets to be uncovered, and dangers lurking around every corner. This was just the beginning of something far bigger. They hadn't just stumbled onto an uncharted world. They had found a place that had been forgotten by time, a place where the past had come back to life. And as they moved forward, Heidi couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been left behind in that jungle wasn't done with them. It would find them again. It would always be there, just beyond the edge of their vision. Because in the forest of monsters, the past was never truly gone. It was waiting, always waiting. The jungle wasn't finished with them, and neither was the secret it hid.